Okay, so what we'll be doing tonight. So we'll start with, as usual, with a review of a recap of last week. And then we'll start with a review of last week for yourselves in your breakout rooms, just to go through your home practice and that. And so our theme for this week is it's craving, effectively, but like we're going to look at the positive end of that too, which is contentment. But we're going to look at craving first. It's often better to sort of like look at the negative end, because like that's most of our experience. So that's what we'll do first. And then we look at the secondary afflictions that arise from craving. So avarice, concealment, deceit, and pretense. And then we'll have our tea break. And after the tea break, we look at hatred and rage, resentment, and spite, and envy, which are examples of that. And then we look at goodwill. And then finally, we look at malice and compassion. So two sides of the same coin in a sense. And then we look at our home practice. So I'll just get out of that. So unfortunately, it's another one of these lots of talking days. It's just full of it. So like I'm going to look at what we did last week. So last week we looked at the intensifiers, how we engage steadily with an object and deepen our experience of it. So as I said last week, they're neutral in themselves, but we need to work creatively with them. So, and they are vital to the spiritual life. So we look first at emotional engagement, Chanda. So Dharma life requires a positive emotional engagement if we're going to be sort of make progress with it. So what we do when we're not emotionally engaged, how do we bring that forward? So we need to look at our environment and our lifestyle. Friendship is very important. Mental refinement. So we in a sense retrain our emotional engagement. Then we looked at resolve, at emotion. So conviction is like we look at our conviction. So being convinced of the Dharma, resolving any doubts around it. Lack of conviction can really undermine our Dharma practice, our practice of meditation, our practice of Buddhism generally. So we look at conviction. Once we're convinced, we can put our emotional energy behind that. And then we looked at attentiveness, so smrti, so persistence over time, so putting our energy behind it. So our mental muscle that keeps our resolve strong over time. And in a sense, resolving not to forget to live by our commitment. So we talked about this being a progressive system. With the constants, it was more that they were like I was talking about it being a rainbow. So there was a sense of them all being there at once. But this is a progressive system. So when there's lack of attentiveness, like what do we do when we get off the cushion? Are we living in a very superficial way and a distractive way? So attentiveness is about shaping our lives so it promotes mindfulness. So ethical conduct is very important here. And then we looked at absorption, samadhi. So the subject and object then enter a new sort of relationship. So we looked at dhyanas, and I went into the sort of the different sort of models for dhyana. So it's essentially the unification of the mind's energies. So, and this is a great sort of support for reflection. Any of you who have done any reflection will know that there's a course, the art of reflection. Anybody who has looked at that will know that the mind needs to be still, needs to be sort of in this state of absorption if you're going to really reflect properly. And then we looked at penetration, prajna. So the subject and object dichotomy at its highest level becomes shattered at this level. So we see the three lakshanas, the three marks of conditioned existence, and we really see these and the dharma doorways to liberation. So we see through the veil of impurities, if you like, of the first four intensifiers, and see through the veil of views and with penetration. And then we looked at so our homework. So there were lots of questions in the homework. You couldn't, like I said, you couldn't possibly do the whole lot. But like that's with this course. If you're doing anything, you're doing the course. So like it is important, like I said last week, to read the notes. If you're reading the book too, it's like, if you can sort of read the book as well, but there's a lot in the book. Is very dense, but try and read the book. But we asked, like I asked you, how is your to reflect on how is your emotional engagement, and what are you attracted to, how do you find yourselves emotionally engaged within your day? What can you do about your lifestyle, your environment, your friendships to help your emotional engagement with the Dharma and with your meditation? How are you refining yourselves? Do you even think that you need to refine yourselves? Where do you experience your pleasures? And how is your resolve? Are you intellectually convinced by the Dharma and by meditation? Do you think they are good things to do? They're all valid, very valid questions that you might need to reflect on. How is your attentiveness? There was another question I asked you to reflect on. Do you get absorbed in things? Can we be a bit more absorbed in meditation? Can we find positive, simple things to do that we can get absorbed in outside of meditation? Obviously, there should be at least ethically neutral, but better if they're skillful things. Mindful walking in the garden, for instance, was one thing I said, or in the park. Do we see into the nature of things in any way? Do we penetrate the true nature of things in any way? And do you see the impermanent, insubstantial, and unsatisfactory nature of life in any way in your own experience? And in meditation, I asked you, could you notice the intensifiers? Could you sort of see any sense of like trying to cultivate them, particularly in your meditation? So that was it. That was your the homework for the week. So we'll go into the breakout rooms now, and you can discuss those for how you get on with the practice for the next 12 minutes, and how your week was generally with the material. Okay, so when Stephen is ready, we'll go into the breakout rooms. Okay, that looks like everybody back. So I hope you enjoyed the chat. So let's launch into what we're looking at this week. So we're looking at contentment, goodwill, and compassion, and their opposites, craving, hatred, and malice. So sometimes it's easier to see a positive by indicating the opposite. So that's what we're going to do, or that's what I'm going to do. So to understand contentment, we really need to understand what craving or non-contentment is. So craving is the tendency for the unenlightened mind, so for all of us, to long for or cling to objects. So longing is the desire for a pleasant object that we don't have. And clinging is the desire to keep hold of a pleasant object that you have at present, or that you sort of ignorantly imagine yourself to have. because we imagine ourselves that we have these objects, that they are ours. So the object may be a thing, so like a house or a car or a diamond ring, if that's what it, or a person who is dear to you. So it could be a fantasy, even a memory, an idea, a set of political or religious beliefs, some notions about ourselves even that make us feel secure and so on. So craving always distorts our interpretation of the craved object. So always in a particular way. It tells us a flattering tale about the object, which we swallow whole. So we exaggerate the object's pleasant aspects. We overrate its power to give us happiness and pleasure. We conceal the object's painful aspects. And so we always experience the object as far more pleasurable, necessary for happiness and important to us than it ever could possibly be. So like, take the example of alcohol. We see a nice bottle of wine and we think only of the pleasure it will bring. So the relaxation in we don't have to worry about things. We ignore the pain of the headache and on the following day, the groan when we realize that, well, the fool we made of ourselves in our drunkenness and so on. Lots of memories of that when I sort of going into work on a Monday morning and what happened on Friday night. I'm sure many of us have sort of examples of that. So this is just an example, but in fact, what we do in relation to anyone or anything that we crave or cling to, it's the same. Something else happens to them. We imagine that having the object will secure or enhance me, like ourselves, the self. We imagine that it makes a big difference. So mixed up with our craving is a belief that having the object will give some sense of solidity to our sense of self. And that's why we do it. We really believe that it will give some sense of solidity to ourself. And in a way it does, but it's a rather sort of brittle and temporary way. It does shore up this sense of self, but it is temporary. And it's worth saying that not all desires are craving. Like we can recognize a difference between craving and natural desires, such as hunger, thirst, sex, well-being, and social acceptance. And all of them in themselves are healthy. I think they're healthy desires. There's nothing wrong with these desires. They are natural, healthy desires. But the problem is, though we can of course get neurotically attached to these healthy desires. For example, hunger and sex can easily become strong greed. So natural desires in themselves are not the problem. It's craving is the problem. So craving is not just a straightforward matter of appetites and emotions. It's always bound up to some degree with a fundamental need to secure one's own identity. That's what we're doing when we crave. We're trying to shore up our identity, our own identity in some way. Everyone who is unenlightened is insecure to a large or a smaller degree about their identity. And this could include being psychologically insecure from trauma from during childhood or something, but it's also at a more fundamental level. By their very nature, identities are insecure. Any identity we cling to is going to be challenged by impermanence, like we talked about this last week, and ultimately death. Like our identities don't last. Like they all the time, our identity, which we cling to, is under threat. So we try to always secure it by sort of grasping at pleasurable objects. In essence, we try to win the race against perceived perceived destruction and decay. Against, like we try to win the race against impermanence, a race that we can't win. And so we give unwise attention to such objects, distorting their true nature, seeing them as more pleasurable than they are, less painful than they are, and as having a real substantial existence. So we're distorting the bare sense information of contact and turning it into a contaminated and unreal object. So what we see is a projection of the mind's desires, basically, to bolster up our identities. So a question for you to ponder for a moment. Do you actually see that your craving might be an attempt to bolster up your identities? Do you see that as like true in your own experience? And this clinging to particular objects tends to spread out into a sort of generalized craving to the whole sense world in which we experience these objects. And this is called craving for existence. So we can we're almost constantly looking for things to be attached to and to crave. And alongside this is a shadow, if you like, craving for non-existence. So a death wish, almost a nihilistic desire not to be. Mostly we don't experience this, but when life gives us more pain than pleasure and no prospect of escape, we may long for this for an ending. However, craving for non-existence is not a rejection of existence itself. It's a rejection of it on the terms upon which we now experiencing it. So we don't want the pain that life is giving us at the moment. It's not that we don't want life. So world weariness here is just frustrated worldliness. Like we want all the pleasure that we think life can give us, but it's not giving us that. So we get world weary. So I think perhaps the most powerful form of craving is the craving for other people. That's where we find this strongest example of craving in our experience. People are seen as the biggest potential source of pleasure, of happiness and security for us. Most of what we call love is the desire for the lover to identify the beloved as the solution to his or her inner emptiness and security. That's what we do. And I have that same experience myself. When I look at my experience of having some person like that I desire, I'm trying to make them fulfill something that they cannot possibly fulfill. They're fulfilling some sense of emptiness and insecurity within me. And what happens here, we don't understand the object of our desire. We disregard its painfulness and impermanence in particular. We don't see the impermanent nature of the person. So it's not a real person, but an object we project onto. And we see this then in our upsets and reactions. And when the object doesn't behave in a way that we want the object to behave. So when the person isn't this ideal sort of love object, we react against that. So can you see in our partners or objects of romantic interest, can we see them as real people? Or are we in some way projecting onto them? Can we be brave enough to let go of our projections and trust that good will come from seeing the person as an actual person without our projections onto them? Again, I've talked about Blake's, the sort of couple of lines from Blake's Eternity, kissing the joy as it flies and living in eternity's sunrise. Can we do that in our sort of relationships with people, our romantic relationships with people? Can we actually see that? Can we do that? Because that's what we're trying to do, to stop projecting onto people, to see people as real and stop this sort of tight holding on and craving. But we can also crave ideas. And what Buddhism calls these views. So we can have political, social, religious ideas about how the world works, or how the world should work for us. So we all cherish and cling to certain notions about who we are and what the world is like and what the world should be like for us. So we have views about ourselves, we have views about the world. And we do this again because these views make us feel secure and give us a sense of satisfaction. They give us a sense that the world is fixed, the world works in a certain way. And we get this particularly attached to views that validate our seeking pleasure. They validate the world for us, and that makes the world a sort of live up to our pleasure, like seeking pleasurable feelings. And they tend to justify our rejection of painful feelings. So the whole point of this is the serious attachment to these views that we can have, because we can't find comfort in them. So they shore up our world in a sense. And it gives us and again, yes, to reiterate this, is this strong attachment we have to these views. And when these views are challenged, we get really angry. You can find if someone attacks our, like say, political views particularly, for religious views the same, like that's where the whole idea of fundamentalism is a problem. Because when someone attacks your views, and I don't think there's a whole lot of difference sometimes between political and religious views. When someone challenges your views, we can get really, really upset. And sometimes that's been sort of wars have been fought over things like that because people's views have been challenged. So more questions. What views can we see manifesting in our daily lives? And what are we most deeply attached to? What views are you most deeply attached to? And can you see that affecting your experience of the world? So I want to look at the other side of the coin now, contentment. So the Sanskrit is alobha, literally non-craving. So early stirrings of contentment can simply be revulsion from craving. So eventually, like we realize that this craving is causing us pain in some way. We can see the pain in craving, that we're not like we're not getting any satisfaction. Like there is no satisfaction in this craving. And eventually this early stirrings of contentment deepens into a feeling of being, sometimes even being humiliated by our own craving. So feeling that this neurotic craving sort of lessens us or even demeans us in some way. So we recognize that the craving makes us a voluntary slave to this craving. And one then voluntarily gives up this sort of, if you like, this ignoble mode of being for something purer and truer. And this is where renunciation begins. So when we start to experience contentment in this way, letting go of the object of craving, we experience the positives of peace and satisfaction. So we're not sort of denying pleasure, but we're just letting go of that tightness around craving that we have. Like, so it's not that we sort of don't sort of have relationships with people, but it's the craving around relationship, the tightness around relationship, the tightness around holding on to people. It's not like we stop eating, we stop enjoying food, but it's the tightness we can have around our ideas of food and that. Or like, it's not that we suddenly give away all our possessions, but it's the way, the tightness we have around having possessions, about sort of just gathering possessions, like, you know. So the more this grows, the less we have to push away objects of craving. So we're not pushing them away, we simply aren't interested in them anymore. So our teacher, sort of Sangharakshita, has talked about it's a growing out of rather than forcibly letting go of things. So again, like I think I've talked about this, it's a sense of something coming, instead of sort of forcing something externally on ourselves, it's something that sort of grows from the inside out. So it's not something we can force on ourselves. I remember when I started practicing first, I decided, well, you can't drink alcohol anymore. And I tried to enforce this on myself and say, like, no, you can't drink. And it was like, I'm a good Buddhist, I can't drink. And it was like this forcing something on yourself. And it was the same with vegetarianism. If you try and force it on yourself, it doesn't work, but it comes out of the sort of practice. And again, it's sort of like you realize through your meditation practice, through your practice of Buddhism generally, that, oh, and your practice of ethics, that, oh yeah, this isn't really a good idea. And it just evolves naturally to your practice. It's not something sort of making a sort of decision, oh, I'm not going to do that because I'm a Buddhist now. It's not, that's not the way it should work, because that there's no sense of being able to sustain it like that. But if it comes out of the depths of one's practice, you realize that, yeah, I shouldn't really eat meat because, like, oh, it's sort of, it hurts other beings, or I can't really go out on a Friday night and drink 10 pints of Guinness or something because I can't be mindful in doing that, or whatever, like, you know, or smoke sort of several reefer or whatever, like, you know, there's a sense you realize that you can't, like, there's no sense of mindfulness, or there's no sense of sort of loving kindness if you're going to eat. It's it, but no one can tell you that you need to do these things. It has to evolve from within for yourself. So our sense of identity is more deeply rooted in the true nature of things. That's what happens. So we start to feel more complete. We don't need to sort of bolster up our ego. So this is what evolves from sort of within us, from deeper within us. So there's a more sort of fullness of contentment that evolves. So contentment offers the possibility of endless progression, if you like. So possessing this degree of contentment, one is increasingly able to give up more things. So they'd like goods, neurotic attachment to people, and also these views that we have, whether they are political or religious views or that. When instead of craving things, we need them, we use them wisely and somewhat disinterestedly, or just appreciate them aesthetically. So a sense of appreciating things rather than appropriating things. That's often what we do with people. We appropriate people rather than appreciating people. Even friends, sometimes we can appropriate our friends rather than appreciate them. So instead of craving or hating people, which is the other side of the coin, we delight in them for what they are in themselves, not for what we want them to be. We no longer exaggerate their pleasure or pain power for us and rejoice in their diversity and really see them for what they are. So instead of clinging to our existing views, we feel free to give up ideas and be sort of, when they become irrelevant or even inadequate. So we see how holding on tightly to these views brings us harm, really, because they bring us into conflict with other people and with the world generally. And eventually we go beyond ideas altogether. So contentment includes a kind of mental flexibility. Whenever the situation, we can respond with a fresh openness of mind. So the opposite of this comes from insecurity. So attempting to deal with life in terms of set, rigid, fixed views, which we need to protect. And that we use these fixed views to protect ourselves. So as our contentment ripens, we also let go of our craving for existence and non-existence. So contentment ripens into a positive detachment from where we experience the pleasure and joys of the world, and we don't crave them. And again, back to sort of Great Blake, I like this, because like we don't exaggerate what they can give us. So kissing the joy as it flies, we live in eternity sunrise. So we don't hate the painful aspects too. So we see the pleasure and pain come and go, and we accept this coming and going. So like, question again, do you experience contentment in your lives? And what conditions are usually there when you experience contentment? Oh, of course, Lazarus, we shouldn't accept. Yeah, no, we shouldn't accept bad behavior. That's not what we're talking about here. Like, we need to sort of look after our own well-being. That's not looking after, like, that's not shoring up a self. That's like not accepting sort of bad behavior, like accepting bad things done to us. That's different, the different thing altogether. Like, So do you experience contentment in your life? And what conditions set up that? So let's look at these secondary afflictions that arise from craving that I was talking about. So craving has many secondary forms, and these emerge from the craving itself. So there's avarice. So this means identifying happiness as having things rather than using or enjoying them. So, for instance, someone who prefers to have money in the bank rather than spend it. So the whole raison d'etre is having the money. It's not there's nothing inherently wrong with money. Sometimes like it's like the love of money, just having money, rather than the use, like it's really useful. You can do a lot of good with money. But like just having money, like just having millions of euro in the bank is of no use to anybody if we're not using it. Or having sort of like, I don't know, 20 shirts in the wardrobe and not wanting to wear them in case we get them dirty or they sort of, they wear out. Or the sort of classic one of an old person living in squalor, and when they eventually die, people find sort of thousands upon thousands of euro tucked away in the mattress that they've been lying on. That type of thing. It's just this idea of avarice, like it's sort of identifying happiness with just having the things rather than using them and enjoying them. So there's no sort of, the avarice doesn't produce any happiness because it's anxious about losing what has been accumulated. And it can never be satisfied. It's never enough. Many of you are, I don't know how many of you might be sort of familiar with the Tibetan Wheel of Life, but it has 6 realms that we can live in. You can take it psychologically, but one of them is the hungry ghost realm. And these hungry ghosts are called pretas, and they have huge bellies and very small mouths. And this idea of avarice always reminds me of that. So they can never be satisfied because they've these small mouths and huge bellies. So this avarice, it just can never be satisfied. We can never have enough. It's like, in a sense, it's like a congealed craving in which the desire itself becomes its own object. So it's a very cold, it's like emotional state. Misers are notoriously hard-hearted. Like I think the classic one is Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, but also if you've read Silas Marner, Silas Marner is another one. So there's this sort of hard-heartedness, sort of cold emotional state. But even in Dharma life, there's a form of avarice. Like we've been very keen to accumulate knowledge about Buddhism, but maybe we sort of the sense of not wanting to share it, and maybe accumulating knowledge, but not practicing it, merely piling up more and more and not practicing. But the antidote to avarice is generosity. It's quite obvious, I think. Like, you know, if we can see it with Scrooge at the end of A Christmas Carol, like big change. He's giving away it all. So the antidote to avarice is generosity, an attitude of giving in which one lets go of one's tendency to sort of solidify oneself through clinging to things. And again, what avarice is, there's a sense of shoring up this sense of self, like solidifying this sense of self. So again, question, do we have any tendency to avarice in any areas of our lives, like with money, food, whatever other areas? It's good to sort of examine how we are in the world for like tendencies like this. So if you don't examine them, we can't sort of do any way to, well, go any way to transforming them. So I want to look now at concealment, pretense, and deceit. So these are three progressive states of our impulse to disguise effectively our true nature and intentions. In particular, to hide one's faults from others. So they're craving because they flow from the fear that honest self-disclosure is a hindrance to obtaining one's desires. So if you show your failings, they might be used to take away from you that which you crave. So usually it's people's sort of love and respect, or like you want some position in a particular group and that. And this can be true in the Sangha, where we crave the affection, respect of our fellow Dharma practitioners, and the desire to appear good, to be the good Buddhist, for instance, can easily eclipse the actual desire to be good. And so we sort of practice concealment. It means concealing one's faults with the aim of making others think that we're better than we actually are. And this is a very low version of what I've been talking about. One doesn't tell outright lies, or even pretend to be other than we actually are. Instead, you kind of make sure that others don't find out the truth. So an example might be changing the subject when a certain thing comes up, or maybe deflecting the question into another area, maybe, or implying without actually lying that something else is the case rather than what's the truth. Common examples are about what you've been doing or where you've been. Say, sort of giving the impression without saying anything explicitly that you've been meditating, when in fact you've been sort of watching DVDs, or you've been sort of binging on Netflix. So like, you give the impression of, oh yeah, I've been meditating, but you haven't actually been, like, and you haven't actually said that, no, I've been meditating on them, but the impression you gave is that's what you've been doing. So the thing which one conceals, mainly, like, there's nothing sort of inherently grossly unskillful in watching DVDs. It might actually be uplifting depending on the DVDs you're watching. But there may be areas that we need to transform. Often the things we conceal are often much less damaging than the methods that we use to conceal them. So if we're concealing, the method of concealment is much more damaging than the fact that we're sort of watching things on Netflix or watching DVDs. And so by doing these concealing methods, we avoid being challenged. We cut ourselves, what we do with that, we cut ourselves off from full and deep communication. And also concealment requires great energy and effort. Like it takes a lot to sort of try and conceal things. And because we may have to keep our story straight and be watchful around that, for anything that might give our game away. So we use up a lot of energy with that. So effectively, we're only partially in the spiritual life, really. And we're using energy that could be used much more positively somewhere else. For instance, in our meditation practice, we could actually be using that energy that we're using to conceal in our meditation practice. So pretense then goes a little further by actively creating a false appearance. So we may not be actively lying again, but our outward behavior contributes to a false image that's to our advantage. So we may be meditating and we're having a really difficult and painful meditation experience, but we wear this sort of beatified smile that's sort of communicating is sort of a deep bliss to the world around us. But it's totally false. Like, you know, we're having a really difficult time. And there's nothing wrong with having a difficult time when we're meditating. But we're trying to give this impression that we're sort of, we're like all calm and that inside. But that's not what actually is going on. Or we talk about how a person with deep insight does this and that and does the other with some great sense of authority, giving the impression that we really know what a person with deep insight does, while never actually claiming that we have deep insight ourselves. So we're given the impression that we know all this, but like we're sort of without actually maybe having the experience. So it's an active inducement to others into the deceit that you're spinning. And so where there's pretense, there's obviously concealment too, usually. So the next is deceit. So this is the active telling of outright lies for the sake of advantage and reputation. So speaking falsely to create the impression that you're better than you are, or that you don't have faults, which you actually do. So the antidote to concealment, pretense, and deceit is the same. You open up and reveal one's private moments to one's spiritual friends. We do it a lot within the spiritual community. We sort of confess to our friends. And we need to notice where we feel reluctant to disclose stuff to our spiritual friends. And we don't do it. We obviously needs to be in a safe environment. And these things are usually the very things we need to talk about and that we need to talk through with people. And Subhuti in the book uses this as a criteria for what we need to talk about in this particular chapter. It's only when we conceal and deceive that we fear exposure. If we stop defending ourselves, we have nothing to fear. I think when we open ourselves up with spiritual friends, and I know this in my own experience, like in confession practice, we have ordered chapters. We are organized in chapters in the order, and confession is a very important part of that. And it's only when we open ourselves up with spiritual friends that we hardly ever find, well, I haven't ever found that people despise us or are deeply shocked by what we've done. So it's not that like, but we think that, I think we think people will really feel like we're a really, really bad person and when we confess things, but that's not what happens. If we're in the environment of spiritual friendship, people are very supportive, but we have to be in that environment, and we have to know who we can sort of confess to. That is an important part of it. So concealment, pretense, and deceit, they're really social evils, really, because they distance us from other people, particularly from our spiritual friends. They're especially dangerous in the spiritual community for this reason. Contentment is among other things the exact opposite of concealment, pretense, and deceit. Contentment begins with a kind of revulsion of these things. It contains a distaste for the falseness and the sort of pettiness associated with them. So contentment isn't concerned with this high reputation, of having a high reputation or being popular. When we're content, we have a complete, well, at its highest, we have this sort of complete candor and about ourselves, and a sense of having nothing to hide. We feel less ashamed of our faults. Like, we all have faults, but when we have a sense of contentment, we have a sense of feeling less ashamed of our faults, and we're more open about them. And that sort of as a great sense of the contentment growing, because we let go of this sort of tightness around it. So as we go into the break, another question. Which of these, concealment, pretense, and deceit, do you feel you're most subject to? What don't you want to share with people? Because we all have things that we are reluctant to share with people. And do you have people in situations where you could be more open about these things with, where you could do less concealment, less pretense, and less deceit? Are there people in situations where you could do less of that and be more open? So maybe you could have a stretch your legs and get a cup of tea if you can, and maybe just ponder that question. And we'll see you back. It's 11:39 now. Let's say 11:40. So we have a 10-minute break, and I'll see you back at 11:50. Okay. Okay, I just wanted to mention again about the course being free and about donations. I didn't mention it last week. Yeah, that like we've been doing, as I said before, we've been doing this for almost 2 years, well, for 2 years, actually over 2 years at this stage. We are totally reliant on people's donations to keep this going. Both the centre, we're now sort of, well, from next week, we'll actually be have courses face-to-face at the centre, and we'll still be dependent on people's generosity. But it has kept us going, and we're really, really grateful to people for their generosity that has kept us going right through a pandemic. So, yeah, of course, the course is free, but we would ask people, I'm asking you if you can make a donation, however small, however large. If you have, thank you. I haven't a clue who has made a donation, who hasn't. I have no access to that information at all. That's why I just keep doing this every so often. If you have made a donation, thank you very much. And I'm just asking again if, just appealing to your generosity. And the way we do this is on the basis of take what you need, give what you can. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say on this matter at the moment. Yeah, just take what you can from the course and give, or take what you need and give what you can. And we're here just to sort of make a difference to people's lives with the Dharma. But we're reliant on people's generosity to keep it going. Monica, about this business of, we were talking about trauma, and I think that's what Lazarus was talking about too, I think, in a sense, with his question. Obviously, some of us need, because of the circumstances of our lives, we need more help. Some of us are lucky, well, most of us are lucky that we can just deal with it quite easily. Like this, it's a sense of insecurity, and we can let go of it quite easily. But as I was saying, some of us are more sort of, the sort of psychological insecurities a bit deeper within us, and we need, like I did say about like trauma from during childhood, and it is harder to let go of, and sometimes we need help, psychological help, psychotherapy help to do that. So if traumas are bit deeper. The Dharma can't do it all. Sometimes we need, I don't know, I've had therapy before I came to the Dharma, so I've had it helped me tremendously. So yeah, the Dharma can't always do it all, particularly when traumas are deep from childhood and that. So yeah, I just thought it was useful to say that. So let's look at the next part of the course. So next we're going to look at goodwill and hatred. So obviously goodwill is the opposite of hatred. So it's advesa, literally non-hatred. So to understand it, we must understand what hatred is. So hatred is a reaction to suffering generally. It extends beyond the immediate suffering to include the cause of our suffering. So hatred usually focuses on the people or on objects that who are causes of our harm. At least we want to push them away. At worst, we want to destroy them. And sometimes it's that strong. We want to destroy the causes of our suffering. The impulse to retaliate stems firstly from the desire to protect ourselves from further harm. It's usually where it comes from first. But it also comes from the desire to restore one's own sense of self. So suffering diminishes our selfhood. That's what it does. It diminishes this sense of ours, like I am me, and the sense of self. And we replenish it, or we feel we replenish it by striking back at something. So craving falsifies the object, making it appear more pleasurable than it actually is. Hatred falsifies the object, making it appear more unpleasant, focusing merely on the painful and offensive feature of it. So denying or ignoring anything that might redeem it. So it legitimizes the idea that eliminating the object will make us happier and more secure. So this person who has hurt us in some way, if we can eliminate them in some way, that's going to make us happier and more secure. Of course, that's a false notion. So hatred affects the whole of our being, both in body and mind. It's painful in itself. You know, if you experience it in yourselves, like it's a painful thing to actually just feel hatred, feel like the anger end of hatred. Anger in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but the hatred aspect of it. It's painful in itself in an immediate way that craving is not always. Like craving is, the suffering of craving can be painful, but like hatred in itself, in a very immediate way, is painful. This is always, people always say this, that the Buddha said this, but it was a later commentator, Buddha Gosha, on the Buddha said it. That it was like, hatred is like picking up a hot coal and throwing it at somebody. It hurts us, like even if we hit the person, it's much more painful for us. You know, like when we pick up the hot coal, we burnt our hand. We feel the immediate pain of that hatred by picking up that hot coal. So those of us who are disposed to hatred are often experienced as sort of unpleasant by other people. Like if we do this a lot, other people find us unpleasant, and they lack the joy that even those caught up in craving have. Like, you know, okay, the example of like the happy drunk. People don't find, there's no sort of like the idea of the person who hates. They're unpleasant to be around, and people avoid them. So can we see how hatred is an attempt to destroy something that is causing our suffering? Can we see that in experience? It's certainly something that I remember in my experience. I'm not saying I'm totally free of it, but certainly something that was very much a part of my experience. So there are secondary outgrowths, if you like, of hatred. So is rage is the most direct manifestation of hatred. So this is an overwhelming desire in the presence of the hated object to attack it. So it's almost like a kind of possession. We get possessed by the hatred. So in the rage, it's a rage that sweeps the mind away. We're absolutely not in control. It's like we sort of just taken over completely by the hatred. And it can be physically or verbally violent. So rage is very disruptive of human society in general, particularly in Sangha. It's the direct opposite of what we're trying to do in a spiritual community. People can be very fearful around people who do rage, even after they've fully apologized. Like, we can apologize for getting into a state like that, but people are still very wary around us, even after that. So it's a very, very destructive state to be in. So the next is resentment. Now, this is something that I have had a lot of experience of in my own life. So it's less overwhelming, if you like, but more insidious and sinister than rage. It's a tendency to nurse hatred. And I remember doing this. So we nurse the hatred while keeping it hidden and waiting for an opportunity to vent it. Like, it's bearing a grudge, waiting for the moment when the person is off guard and we can strike. And it's very dangerous. It's poisonous, and it's long lasting because we hold on to it, and we hold on to it until we can use it. And people can keep grudges all their lives. We can do it. And the only thing that sort of stopped me doing resentment was starting to practice the Dharma. I could probably be still doing, against certain people, I could probably be still doing it. I'm sort of, well, it would be 20 years ago that I started learning how to sort of deal with this stuff. I'd probably be doing it 20, well, will I last 20 years time? I don't know. But I would probably be doing it till the day I die. And I've seen people who were like doing it for the whole of their lives. It is so insidious because we just keep it inside, and it's like it feeds on itself. It's very, very dangerous, and it's poisonous, and as I said, it's long lasting. And like, it can have as its object a person, a class of people, or even a whole race or a nation of people. It starts wars. It starts wars in families. It starts like religious wars. It starts all sorts of problems. So grudges may be handed down over even many generations. Conflicts in countries. I think the one that like our own country, the whole conflict within sort of Northern Ireland, South Africa, you need major systems of the word has gone from me, a senior moment, but you need major sort of no, the word's gone, I can't get it, like, you need to do major work to sort of try and get over it. So, like, for instance, Ireland's relationship with England. You can see it that, like, last weekend when Ireland were playing England in rugby. It just like they sort of, like, I've lots of friends who are English, and it just the blood just boils like the minute you start watching a rugby match. And like today, England are playing France, and I would naturally, then something special happening today, like, but I will actually cheer reluctantly for England today. It goes against my sort of something deep within me. I will actually cheer for England today because I want Ireland to win the championship. It's just crazy, man. And it's regardless of the legitimacies of complaints that we may have this whole 800 years, whatever. We keep holding on to the emotional resentment. Sort of, it's a barrier. Reconciliation, that's the word that my silly senior moment couldn't get. Eventually it came out. So like we tend to sort of, I tend to think we tend to have a predisposition to resentment, sometimes in the Sangha. And we must really work hard to eliminate it. It's very, very destructive. It was nearly very destructive to my life until I sort of, I wouldn't say I've totally eliminated, but like I've certainly worked with it, had to work with it to. And spite is another sort of avenue of that. It's more of a general disposition, really, I suppose, a tendency to bite, to snap at people, of being habitually irritable and spiky. Certainly had a tendency towards that. The other is envy. So it's a form of hatred that springs from one's displeasure at the success and achievement and sort of honor or goodness of other people. So envy is when we tend to think we're lacking in particular achievements or qualities, and we feel hurt by seeing other people have these things. And we want to take them down a peg or two. We want to take them down a level, and close the gap, or the perceived gap, between them and us. And it's probably the most unpleasant of all forms of hatred. And it seems like the better we know the person involved, the more nasty the envy can be. And I think we, like Subhuti says it in the chapter, we greatly underestimate the power of envy as a force in personal relationships and in the world as a whole. It's disruptive, it's destructive, but it's kind of invisible emotion, because because we can't, by its very nature, openly declare it. We can't reveal our envy except as part of a process of renouncing it, because nobody will affirm or honor envy. To reveal envy is to expose an inner meanness that nobody can admire except those who share it. So many people never admit to envy, even to themselves, and remain in its grip. So the only way to express it skillfully is to confess it and to purge it. And I think in confessing envy, like to actually naming it, we tend to sort of to purge it in a sense, or we start to purge it. So which of these, which of rage, resentment, spite, and envy are we more prone to? And how are you working with this? And how might you work with this? Do you have ways of working with this? So the antidote to it is mudita, sympathetic joy. So simply being happy for people's success and happiness. And it's very difficult to sort of cultivate for a lot of us. So we can't cultivate this through rejoicing. There's something that goes on in the spiritual community, and it's particularly strong in Triratna, this idea of rejoicing in merits, openly expressing admiration and gratitude for others' good qualities. We do it when people take a step and declare, when they become mitras. I'm not going to sort of spend a long time to sort of explaining what a mitra is, but when people sort of publicly declare that they are a Buddhist, there's a ceremony. And part of that ceremony is that somebody stands up and just talks about that person's good qualities. And it's so rare in society generally that someone will do something like that. And it's to sit there and be part of one of those ceremonies and to hear someone being rejoiced in. When, like generally in society, we do the opposite. And it is such a positive effect on a gathering of people when someone stands up and just talks about somebody in such a positive way. Just, there's no ifs and buts. It's just, this person is, like, say, generous, this person is friendly, this person is whatever. And so someone just openly expressing admiration and gratitude for this person's good qualities. And it's a really important part of the Dharma life. It's all too easy to sort of to feel inadequate in life. Like we don't, if people don't talk, well, don't talk positively about us. Don't tell us, like, no, don't talk about our good qualities. It's very easy to feel inadequate and diminished by the achievements of others, especially our friends. So the more that we rejoice in other people, the more our sense of, like, sort of inner worth is built up. And the more that we sort of begin to feel inadequate, the more diminished by the achievement of others we feel, the more sense of inner poverty that we will feel. So hatred and its secondary afflictions are an unpleasant collection of mental states. They're very unpleasant collection of mental states. And it isn't easy to face into them. But we all experience them to some degree. Underneath them is a sense of sort of neural primal energy, I think, which is part of human nature. And the energy becomes hatred when it is frustrated. But we cannot cut off from this energy or deny it. Rather, the key is to find a positive outlet for it, to channel it into sort of something positive before it becomes hatred. So I want to talk about goodwill. So goodwill is not any of these forms of hatred. Goodwill is not based on any sense of insecurity about our existence as a separate self, or in trying to resolve anxiety by destroying the source of it. It emerges from a happy weakening of our sense of being separate from other people, from a sense of connection and expansion to include in our concern the being of others. So a sense of feeling a sense of solidarity with other people. We sense that life, we sense the life in the sense of a life, the sense of a life with us. So it's a sense of solidarity of a life with a life. So we feel sympathy for them and reach out to them as if they are a part of us and we are a part of them. So the word goodwill, we may suggest an ordinary everyday quality. But this is like just the bottom rung, if you like, of be poetic, but like of a golden ladder, ascending to the very highest selflessness that identifies sort of spontaneously with all life. So this is the greatest love of the Buddha himself. And like there are a number of steps on this ladder. So at the pinnacle, if you like, is the great compassion of the Buddha. But it starts with simple goodwill. So firstly, so there's a growing sense that we cannot harm other people or living beings. And we realize our fundamental identity with them. Again, this fundamental solidarity with other people. We identify of a sense of identity of life with life. We become sensitive to the pains of others and actively desire to avoid being the cause of it. So this comes out of the practice of like the metta-bhavana. And like it just doesn't include other human beings. It includes other beings. So becoming often happens, people, particularly out of the metta-bhavana practice, particularly from the fifth stage, people become vegetarian after learning to meditate. And then people become vegan after becoming vegetarian as things deepen. So this stage is the avoiding of hatred, you might say. Second, there's a positive ethical phase. We not only seek to avoid causing harm to others, but we actively sort of wish them well. So again, the metta-bhavana again, we're prepared to contribute to their well-being. So we're still fundamentally concerned with ourselves, but we can reach out to others, identifying with them to some degree. So then our sense of separate identity it's lessened, but then it's dissolved in a larger identification with life itself as it manifests around us. So we're more and more prepared to lay aside our own self-interest in order to serve others. And we can see this in sort of people do it like, and it's not an exclusively Buddhist concept, but we can see it in the broad spiritual community. And we do this, it's done, sometimes people can do it with a sense of, I don't quite know the word, but it's, yeah, when it's not done with a sense of joyfully and when it's not done spontaneously, there's a tightness around it. But like when it's done with this sense of joyfulness or the sense of spontaneity, we sort of feel this sort of the life in other people as much as we do for our own life. That's the crux of it, feeling this sort of the life in others, other beings, as much as we do for our own life. Eventually, this love and goodwill leads to the complete transcendence of our own self-attachment. And through it's a swelling of this love, this Maitri, we recognize that there is no fixed sense of identity. And I talked a bit about this last week, but we have nothing to defend. There is nothing, because we realize that we have no fixed identity, and that means that we have nothing to defend or make more secure through our craving or hatred. We are open to and identify with all beings. So we're not, and that is not exclude. We are one of that. Something I think that we can forget is that we are one of those all beings. Like, so there's a sense of identifying with all beings. So again, a question: what level of goodwill do you mainly operate at? And do you have any sense how you might move to a deeper level? So there's one other dimension to all this that is brought out by the Abhidharma. So this polarity between compassion and malice. So vimsa and vimsa. So himsa means harm. So vimsa means intense harm, especially cruelty or malice. So malice is not just inflicting harm, but enjoying doing so. So this is how it differs from earlier forms of hatred. So we may feel a satisfaction when driven to cause harm by hatred of the previous types that we've discussed. So this is the satisfaction of having removed or taken steps to remove the sort of object which is a threat to us. But malice is an active enjoyment of causing pain, which we deliberately cause. Like, say, the bully at school, or people who actively enjoy blood sports. I could sort of go on a rant about that. I'm not going to. So the extreme malice is enjoying the infliction of pain and even death. For most of us, if we do this, it'll be with the tongue, usually our speech. So verbal bullying can cause an intense suffering and make you really destructive. So slagging, the way we can sort of, particularly I think in Ireland, the way we can use our tongue in a very, very destructive way can be very, very malicious. But I think it really comes into its own when we sort of get into the area of gossip and backbiting, spreading malicious rumors and the like, telling, as they say, barefaced lies about people, where we're manipulating social feelings so that the mood of the group turns against someone. So social media also lends itself, I think, to this kind of malice. Some of the stuff that goes on, some people who are quite sort of benign in normal social engagement, something happens in social media and they lose all sense of reason, and they don't seem to feel that words have the same meaning on social media. And I think social media can be very, very insidious. And the way that we can use words on social media, I think it's something that we have to be very, very careful of. So malice can have two elements. Firstly, there's this enjoyment of the power that inflicting suffering on someone else gives you. There was a friend of mine, like a really good friend of mine, but he turned slagging into an art form. And like I remember asking him at one stage why he did it. And he said he did it before someone else did it to him. So it gave him a sense of power over the situation, of inflicting this on someone before they did it to him. So it gives us a stronger sense of identity as we inflict our will on others. It's not quite what he was doing, but like, there was some element of that. Definitely gave him a sense of security. So it's highly addictive, And it only lasts as long as the suffering inflicted lasts. So it can like really escalate. Secondly, there may be sort of a deep inner feeling of being wronged, a pain from which one is sort of only sort of momentarily relieved when others suffer, even when those people are innocent and uninvolved. So it's and non-harmfulness is the exact opposite of this. You don't harm things. You don't even feel like harming them. When someone hurts you, you don't feel like hurting them back. Indeed, you feel like a sense of revulsion against any such actions. And as non-harm gets stronger, you feel an active revulsion at any thought of harming beings. At the most developed, this becomes compassion, karuna, the desire to help others overcome their suffering on a very deepest level. At its highest, it's the complete overcoming of self-attachment and an identification with all beings. So it's a complete identification with all of life. So do you do malice in any way in your life? And in what contexts? So goodwill is a general responsiveness to life beyond ourselves, in whatever state we find it. Compassion is whatever happens to goodwill when we are confronted with suffering. And we desire to do whatever we can to remove that pain. The more developed we are, the more we see the cause of that suffering. And we're trying to alleviate its attachment and ignorance. So we're especially encouraged the practice of Dharma to resolve the suffering. And when goodwill encounters happiness, it becomes sympathetic joy, this mudita, as we've already seen. So when we're in goodwill, if you like, we find that others direct their ill will to us. We experience equanimity, upekkha, as response. So this is a calm mood of non-reactivity. So when people throw their stuff at us, we just have a deep sense of solidarity that's not disturbed by what's coming at us. So at the Buddha's enlightenment, there's a story of Mara. So Mara is like the personification of all our sort of negativity. And so when the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, there's a sense of Mara who was personified. It's like sort of a devil type figure. And Mara was throwing missiles and sort of arrows and that at the Buddha. And the Buddha was sitting there, as the missiles and arrows were coming at the Buddha, they were just turning into flowers and falling at the feet of the Buddha. And this was happened just before the Buddha's enlightenment. So this is some like an image of upekkha, of equanimity. So as people will throw sort of ill will at us, they will throw hatred at us. It's like the proverbial thing of water off a duck's back. It doesn't sort of affect us in any way. So goodwill, sympathetic joy, compassion, and equanimity form what are called the Brahma Viharas, the sublime dwelling places. So we have like the Metta Bhavana practice. So like we do the Metta Bhavana practice, we can do the Brahma Vihara practices. So we can actually develop these states in a meditation practice. And so develop metta, develop sympathetic joy, develop compassion, and develop equanimity. And through our meditation practice, sort of bring that into our daily life. So hatred is the direct opposite of goodwill. So it's called a far enemy. There's a near enemy of goodwill, though, something that looks superficially like it, but is not quite it. And that's called prema. It's selfish affection or sticky attachment. So we appear to be concerned about people to get what we want from them. We may even think that we're deeply caring for them, but it's not, but only as long as we get from what we want from them. It's often what happens it's a feature of romantic or family relationships. Much of the time, we want something from people, and I love you as long as you love me, as long as you're giving me what I want. And as soon as you're not giving me what I want, I won't love you anymore. It's often what we do. And we recognize it very quickly in our reactions to people involved when they don't give us what we want. And the far enemy of compassion is malice. The near enemy of compassion is pity. The far enemy of sympathetic joy is envy. And the near enemy is a sort of being a sycophant or hypocritical. And the far enemy of equanimity is reactivity. And the near enemy is some sort of indifference. We feel that we're sort of like Teflon man or whatever, but not, there's a sense of indifference. So coming back to compassion, Subhuti says in the book, caring for others to the point of being willing to give sacrifice, even sacrifice oneself for others. Sacrificing ourselves for others' well-being completely spontaneously and naturally, and not as a duty or a practice. That must be the highest manifestation of the human spirit. But this can only come about as the basis for a complete clarity that has been decisively defeated in ignorance. So it's the highest ideal that we can achieve as a human being. So it's the highest manifestation of the human spirit. So it's not something that we can sort of just suddenly develop. It does take work. So I want to go through the homework now briefly. I've gone sort of a minute over time already. So these will come into the, just share a screen quickly, so I don't keep you half the day. Oh no. So again, read the notes on contentment, goodwill, and compassion, and read them again reflectively so you get the depths in them. Focus this week on recognizing each of the mental states that we talked about in the class and that are in the notes in your own experience, getting into the habit of watching these aspects of the mind in your daily life, and sort of practice rejoicing in people more, and responding with sympathetic joy to the joys and the compassion and to their sorrows, and with equanimity to the difficulties that they may cause you. None of this is easy, but just practicing it, trying to practice it, without putting any sort of trying to force things on yourself. There are some sort of meditation reflections in the notes. You might like to try these. And as I said before, you can't do everything. And if you're doing something, you're doing the course. You're at least sort of getting something from it. So do what you can, but do read the notes and try and get it from there. So that's it this week. Enjoy your week and enjoy the practice. Sorry, I missed those questions or those comments in the chat. I've run out of time. It's 11 or it's 12:33 now, and I don't really. If you want to stay and go through them, I'm quite happy to stay for about 15 minutes. But some sun is on my screen, so I'm not quite seeing it. Okay. Yeah, I really should finish now and let you get up and enjoy the sunshine. And I'll see you next week for week 5. Okay, so enjoy yourselves, enjoy the weekend, and enjoy the sunshine.